Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the session on SMEs and Human Rights, how to build better. Welcome to the session from the IE, the International Organization of Employers, who is hosting this event. This event will be hosted in English. The reason is that, of course, the forum very much focuses on Latin America. However, it focuses also on the Caribbean, and English is many of the islands the main language. You will be able to ask your questions in Spanish. My colleague Luis Rodriguez will then translate it for me. So don't be shy. We want to have a very interactive discussion after we had the initial statements of some distinguished panelists. So you can be very free to speak in Spanish and it will be translated. No worries on that. SMEs are the backbone of many economies. They employ about 70% of all workers worldwide, and they are about 90% of all companies. So they are hugely important. However, in the human rights debate, we all refer to the importance of SMEs, but in fact, in the policy making, they are largely excluded. So the aim of this panel is really to look what are the needs of SMEs, how we can address the needs of the SMEs, and how we can ensure that they play a leading role in the build better exercise. I will stop here now because Dante Pesce from the UN Working Group will give an introduction into the topic before we go then to the different panelists. I also will then introduce the panelists one by one as they speak. So Dante, over to you.
Thank you, Matthias, very much for the invitation to participate in this session. It's a very important session, and I'm the member of the Working Group for Business and Human Rights from Latin America, currently the vice chair. And the first thing that I have to say is that we don't know enough about SMEs and their relation with business and human rights in the public policy setting. It's an area that we talk a lot. Let's say we say SMEs as at the center, very important, but we really haven't dig deeper and the understanding of the dynamics and how to be inclusive regarding SMEs, etc. Let me show you two slides regarding our position as working group regarding SMEs. The first slide is that the next slide, please. Guiding Principle 14 is explicit about the responsibility of business enterprises to respect human rights applied to all enterprises, regardless of their size, sector, operational context, ownership, and structure. That means that includes SMEs by definition, but there is a recognition that small and medium-sized enterprises might have less capacity and more informal processes and management structures than larger companies, so their policies and processes will take different forms. And some SMEs can but we recognize that some SMEs can potential to affect severely human rights and should be part of our equation. And due diligence should include and has to include the supply chain or the value chain overall, which by definition will include many SMEs, including SMEs operating more in the informal economy as well, which is another layer of, let's say, a gray area where we don't know enough and we don't really have a strategic approach on it. The next one, the next slide, please. The working group has a mandate to unpack principles when there is not enough clarity in how to understand that principle. So we unpacked in 2017 Principle 14 regarding all enterprises, and we did a zoom on SMEs. And we came out with some recommendations that, for a large extent, have not been taken on board by our governments. And this is an area that actually we need to fix if we really want to go into, let's say, root causes of human rights abuses, but also bringing in the huge number of SMEs that exist in the world and their workers, etc. So we did some recommendations to governments, raise awareness by governments to how to connect business human rights and the guiding principles with SMEs. require respect for human rights in public procurement, which is a driver for potential change, involve SMEs in the development of the national action plans on business and human rights, which is something critical to capture their voice and to capture their perspective, which is not the same than larger companies for sure. Support the implementation of guidance and integrate the perspective of human rights into development agencies and the ones that actually provide support and technical assistance to SMEs and all existing platforms of SME support. So this is one very specific set of recommendations for governments. We haven't had the resources. We're actually getting there with some additional funding to actually connect those recommendations and see what has happened since 2017 in the countries, and specifically in the Latin American countries, and the 9 ones that are a priority for the project so far funded by the EU. But we need to see, because frankly speaking, we only have anecdotal information, and for a large extent, these recommendations have not been taken on board. Then we have specific recommendations for SMEs. Ask for help. And ask for help in your industry associations. Use your existing procedures for reporting or for, let's say, compliance with other standards to build on top of them. Don't create, and there is no need to create a different structure to manage human rights impacts. If you have, let's say, a compliance mechanism to comply with other kinds of standards on health and safety, or any kind of requirements that are being asked for you by your clients, it's something that you can build on top of. Let's say if you have a function on quality or a function of compliance that I said already, that is the structure that you already have in place is where to build on. And use peer support mechanisms across the different sectors that might have knowledge for the SMEs. But clearly SMEs in a vacuum and individually will not make a huge difference if they don't collaborate to each other. And finally, recommendations for larger companies. Know your chain much better. Use your leverage and develop good procurement practices in order not to undermine by having practices in place that basically undermine the capacity of an SME to respect human rights, and at the same time push using your leverage to increase the competitiveness of your suppliers, and at the same time by respecting human rights. We also see a critical role of industry associations like IOE and their members at the national level, because it's the platform that can support large numbers of companies, and also other institutions to help unpack and coordinate efforts regarding SME participation in public policy setting, but also including their perspective and how things are implemented in terms of policies. But going back to the first point, and sorry, in the next slide, you can find our thematic report on SME online with a specific summary that can be available, that is available and should be in Spanish actually. And also in our human rights due diligence report, there is reference to SME in the companion document, and also in last year policy coherence to government's report, there is also a reference to SME and the supply chain, public procurement, etc. But going to my first point, Matthias, very timely to bring in this conversation. We don't really know enough, and this is a missing element in the equation of good policies to be developed and to be implemented regarding business and human rights in the whole world, and in particular in our Latin American context. So congratulations for this call. We need to learn, and I will be all ears to learn from our next speakers. Thank you very much. Can't hear you, Matthias. You're in mute.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dante. And you already spoke about the importance of employers' organization to support SMEs and also to represent SMEs vis-a-vis the government. With us now is Pablo Dragun. He comes from our member federation in Argentina, from UIA. Pablo is working very closely with SMEs at national level. He's also very engaged at the international level. He's a member of the ILO governing body. So he really has both had the international head as well as the national head. Pablo, over to you. Can you give us, on the one hand, a bit more insight what role the employers' organization have actually in order to support SMEs, but also perhaps a bit of the challenges SMEs face in Argentina at the moment? 5 minutes you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. Thank you, Dante, and thank you all for being here listening to us. First of all, I would like to address the recognition of the UN guiding principles and obviously relating to the Argentinian problems. We think that the guiding principles on business and human rights is really a good guidance, but the Argentinian problems and perhaps Latin American problems is the lack of development and the lack of economic growth, the impossibility to catch up in terms of GDP and productivity with the developed countries, and this has been related in the Panama Declaration of the ILO in 2018. Addressing the root causes, the root that causes the human rights challenges such as poverty, weak governance and corruption is a key to move also the business and human rights agenda forward. But in Argentina, more than 35% of the Argentinian workforce is in the informal economy, and this is sometimes related and with a lack of involvement into a good global, into a good value chain. And the problem is that in Argentina, we managed to go down strongly the informality between until 2011, but the last decade it has been stuck between 30 and 35%. Our economy does not grow for the last decade and will go down considering the effect of the COVID-19, and without finding the innovative ways to address these challenges linked to the informality is linked strongly to productivity. We have lots of studies made in international level and also at the WIA in Argentina, and this will be hard for the SMEs to a better implementation of the UN guiding principles. However, in the WIA, we have been doing different activities to address the UN guiding principles. For example, we managed to get a toolkit with the help of the ILO and the ACTEMP with self-evaluation and regulation need in 12 different aspects, but sometimes are something related to regulation, such as forced labor, child labor, discrimination, minimum wage, freedom of association, among others. And with this toolkit that we have been also connecting to the different SMEs and to our vast network in Argentina. Argentina is the 8th largest territory in the world, so it's a huge country, but not that much in terms of population. We have 24 provinces, and the differences between regions is really important, and this should be taken into account. So we try to get into them by training them, different courses of training of trainers. And we believe that the opportunities for the SMEs are important to facilitate the guidance, to achieve the due diligence, but no matter what the SMEs are doing, the main issue that concerns us is that the rules and the macroeconomic environment in which all the companies, but also the population is merged, is changing all the time. So this is it's particularly difficult aspect for Argentina. For example, we try to help the SMEs to achieve this, and in some cases they already been doing, but the main problem is that the lack of financing and the different troubles in order to get these enterprises in a sustainable way is really important. For example, always the recommendation 204 of the ILO of that it's already 5 years that states that all the state members should promote implementation of a comprehensive employment policy framework that may include some elements related to pro-employment macroeconomic policies that support aggregate demand, productive investment, and structural transformation, and among other things that I will not be extended. The main problem is that Argentina, as a country, did not manage how to generate this virtuous circle since the recommendation, and even though before that, we strongly believe in social dialogue, we strongly work with workers, and we strongly work with governments. But sometimes the inconsistency of some policies made this difficult for the SMEs to achieve. For example, we try to get to them, and we get, but sometimes they say, okay, for example, the owner of the SME, okay, this is important, but I really have to do something with the bank because I'm not getting, I have to get some cash because my supplier is not, because I have to pay to my supplier and my client is not paying. So we have these particular aspects that make for the SMEs a little bit harder. We believe that the opportunity for the SMEs, and in this context of COVID-19, that indeed differentiating for the other countries in the world, we the last 2 years in Argentina were really hard. Our GDP went down, and our industrial GDP went down 17% per capita since the last 4 years. So the companies were really struggling before the COVID-19. Now, but since the most important thing of Argentinian, I believe, is the resilience, particularly from businessmen. The changing environment, the difficulties to develop made them good survivors. But the main problem is that good survivors are not necessarily what is good for a good development in the long term, which is what is needed from Argentina for the country to develop. Maybe the companies survive, but if they do, or maybe they want to grow or something like that, then the conditions change every time, and the company is really in danger, and with the company, the workers as well. But we believe that to have an approach of responsible business conduct for SMEs means that they will try to take into account all these possible negative consequences of the operations, that while contributing to the sustainable development of the place they are living, the engagement with local governments, the engagement with the workers, and to have to be very active. I think that in some cases it's been doing naturally, and the good thing about the principles, that, as I said at the beginning, is a good guidance to order different aspects of the governance. We believe that it's a huge responsibility of Argentina to engage to SMEs, to the big companies, not to have this dispute between SMEs and large and multinationals. They are all companies, and they all need to work together in order to raise productivity, to be more competitive in a difficult environment, and to create a more decent work in Argentina. That is what has been missing, the creation of new jobs in the last 10 years at least. So this is my word. I hope I didn't went too long. Thank you, Matias.
Thank you, Pablo. Excellent. Now your debate have not been too long. You already spoke about the impact of COVID on SMEs, and SMEs are particularly, of course, impacted by COVID. On the one hand, because they don't have access to finance, and they also don't have the cash reserves, right? So they are really in trouble. Data from the ILO shows us that particularly SMEs in Latin America are challenged through COVID-19. And countries in the Caribbean face particular challenges because they heavily rely on tourism, which is, of course, due to Corona, all very down at the moment. I'm very happy to have with us our next speaker, who is Stephanie Fingal. She is the CEO of Trinidad Tobago, and she will give us, on the one hand, a bit of an update about the challenges of SMEs in Trinidad Tobago, the impact of Corona on SMEs, and also then how we can ensure that despite the crisis, SMEs can be supported into better respect human rights. Over to you, Stephanie.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting us to present this morning. And I want to start off with what Dante said, that not a lot is known about SMEs. And clearly, we have a lot more to learn about them. So approximately in the Caribbean, we have about 95% of our businesses in the region are SMEs, and they contribute approximately 40% to the region's GDP. They are a significant employer of labor in the region, and also a significant challenge they face with the high informality that is the very nature of SMEs. Approximately 40% of them, according to the World Bank, face informal businesses. SMEs, however, play a very important role, social role, and they support a lot of food and different types of services. So what has happened with COVID-19 since it started around March? It landed on our shores in Trinidad and Tobago. And governments have been putting containment measures with very strong support from the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARFA. And working closely with Caribbean stakeholders, we have managed to coordinate regional responses and preparedness, and to develop situation reports, travelers guidelines, and air and seaport guidelines as well. In the Eastern Caribbean, among the 19 countries and several dependencies, there's a total right now of about 6,300 reported cases as of yesterday. And of course, this number is increasing even in Trinidad. Interestingly, the majority of the smaller islands have reported 0 deaths. And among the larger islands, Jamaica reports the lowest percentage of deaths to cases. Where I live in Trinidad and Tobago, the number of confirmed cases as of yesterday is 2,544 and 39 deaths. So we are managing this very closely. As far as our response to the evolving impact of the virus is concerned, generally countries have been reconfiguring healthcare systems because we do not have very advanced healthcare systems in this part of the world. So we have had to do a lot of reconfiguration. We have had to close our schools and other non-essential businesses along the way, and instituting various degrees of lockdown, starting, opening back, and closing down again. We have enforced social distancing with different levels, some 5, some 10, and also legislation more recently passed, like in Trinidad, of the wearing of masks. And we continue to have border closures and restrictions, even though tourism, as you know, it contributes to an average of about 39% of our economic revenues and 37% of employment in the Caribbean. But of course, these closures have impacted our GDP with an estimated regional decline of between 7% to 12%, following a 2% increase in 2019. So things have turned against us. In other areas of business, like the majority of countries around the world, we are re-engineering our manufacturing processes and introducing new products and discontinuing others. Of course, we have beauty products industries here, and you find that they are turning to making sanitizers now. So things are really changing. Organizations have been restructuring, either permanent layoffs, temporary layoffs, reduced hours and all the other things, and reduced pay. Changing our sales and service delivery models. A lot of re-engineering that should have taken place some time ago. You find everyone is now really hot on that in trying to get things ahead. The impact to businesses, as in most regions, the sectors affected are the travel and hospitality and tourism, light manufacturing, restaurants and catering. We have closed the in-house dining, and so generally, like in Trinidad, personal care services, printing and packaging, and general retail. Lots of closures of retail stores in our malls and those places. And of course, many other small and medium enterprises in different sectors, and they have been closing. We are handling a lot of restructuring and retrenchment and things like that, redesigning of employment contracts and all those things in response to what the evolving situation. So as expected, businesses continue to experience reduced revenue due to various types of restrictions. For us in the Caribbean, without tourism, our foreign exchange reality is very grim. And we have great difficulty in accessing things externally from where we need the US to purchase. So that is another impact. Disruptions to the supply chains as everywhere else. And increased time off requests from employees with children due to closure of schools, daycares, and so you find in some cases people cannot work from home and therefore they are unpaid. So what has happened to SMEs in particular? They are vulnerable to these impacts because they cannot pay people while they're not working. And of course, over 60% of our businesses in Trinidad and Tobago do not have a business continuity plan. Working from home is a novel thing in this part of the world, and therefore it's now ramping up because of COVID-19. That's a good thing, but of course, it costs money, which we do not readily have. So with the extended closure of schools, you have children really not being in a structured environment, and that is taking a toll as well. Some families cannot afford to buy all the different devices. We actually, in Trinidad, have run out of devices at reasonable costs, and some students have no access to those or to Wi-Fi. Special needs children as well are at a disadvantage, and because they do not have the necessary resources at home and not being able to go to their schools and so. For migrant workers, we have a lot of migrant workers in this part of the world, and coming from Venezuela in particular. And of course, with restrictions on free movement, some of them are losing opportunities for work, which they had before, and they're exposed to exploitation and even inaccessibility to healthcare. So you find that the spread of the virus among those groups would be higher. And added to this is the increased marginalization of women. We have a lot of single mothers in this part of the world, and with job opportunities shrinking, some of them are facing more abuse from their spouses or cohabitants and so, and as well financial distress. Tenant evictions as well, and homeless poor due to job loss. That is another increasing situation, in spite of governments' pleadings for landlords to be merciful to these people. So what are some of the resilience we're talking about for SMEs? We consider that the governments have, in some cases, allowed zero or low-cost financing. They are supporting and guaranteeing loans. In Trinidad and Tobago, for instance, we have an interest-free loan program and an entrepreneurial grant to assist SMEs. The Grenada government provided an expansion of the small business soft lending facility. And in St. Lucia, you have moratoriums and bank loans and so. Liquidity support and direct grants have been provided in some countries for wage and salary support, in some cases payroll support, and in others to just make money available to the social services departments to assist those persons who are out of a job or out of the support that they get. Remember, in this part of the world, remittances would have been coming from the UK, from Canada, from the United States. And those countries, not so much Canada, but of course the UK and the United States, you find that with the serious infection out there, less revenues are coming in, and that impacts us in the Caribbean because those who receive remittances are now out of money. So building forward for SMEs, we would consider access to opportunities for trade and expansion. Small islands like we have a more greater difficulty in accessing those opportunities because of certain restrictions and certain standards and so, which we might not readily meet. Of course, there's adjustment as well to the cost of doing business and digitalization, which we are far behind in. And in some of our countries, we do not have the ease of doing business yet. Structurally, we are not ready. Multi-skilling of human resources, we generally have people wanting to stay doing the same job for life. And now people are finding that companies having to retool and to even to have the unions accept variations to jobs and things like that. We have modernization and introduction of relevant IR systems and legislation. Changes are required because we now have contract variations and as well all these different new things that we may have regarding force majeure and unavoidable beyond expectation events like a COVID-19 situation. We also need, I believe, in this part of the world, more active regional economic integration. We have CARICOM, but we do not really see the fruits of that in a practical way. And more than ever, there is need for that to be activated and for countries to really get on board with doing something and not just talking. Strengthening of social dialogue institutions. We are trying right now to meet with the ILO and perhaps the IOE as well and other institutions in this part of the world, in Trinidad and Tobago, to have a non-crisis dialogue with the union bodies, the umbrella bodies, to find some common ground. That's how we move forward in rebuilding and building forward. And of course, we need a more unified lobbying through employers associations as well, where collectively we can lobby the governments. And as everyone has said across the world, the private sector has a big role to play in even assisting SMEs, because they are the ones with the great funding, and particularly the financial institutions how they now re-examine the criteria, the kind of risk that they take in helping our SMEs move to the next level, keeping employment in place, and of course, looking at our SDGs down the road, which we all know are very important for all territories. So that's our general position at this point in time, and I want to thank you all for the opportunity to share with you. Goodbye.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was really comprehensive and a good picture about the challenges you're facing in the Caribbean, which is very important to bring this to this forum, because too often we hear about the mainland, about Latin America, and the Caribbean are forgotten. So thank you so much for joining us here. I think we have a sound problem. Okay, and we go ahead. Before spoke about the challenges for SMEs when it comes about framework conditions, right? About the enabling environment. SMEs, which are in a context where corruption is high, where informality is high, where social protection is lacking, where violence and harassment, where international labor standards, where UN conventions are not implemented and enforced. In these countries, in these environments, it's very hard for SMEs to fulfill their responsibility to respect. So framework conditions which are conducive for employing people, which are conducive for human rights, are so important for SMEs. An organization which is very active actually to support countries in this endeavor is the International Labour Organization. And the International Labour Organization has one office, which is called ACTEMP, which is the employers wing within the ILO, who supports particularly also the companies, the business side, the employers organizations in these countries. So José Luis will give us an insight about what the ILO is doing in order to support SMEs, employers federation, and governments to build these enabling environments to which are conducive for growth, but also conducive for human rights. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Matthias. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. Just let me share my screen here. Let me begin by emphasizing the important role SMEs play as a major source of employment. There has been a lot of good information already shared by some of my colleagues, but I want to just emphasize a few key facts. In Latin America and the Caribbean, micro and SMEs account for 99.5% of enterprises, and 9 out of 10 are micro firms. Overall, some of the recent estimates suggest that micro and SMEs generate over 60% of total employment. However, most of which is in the informal sector. Before COVID-19, SMEs faced a significant productivity gap with respect to large enterprises. And this is a very important issue that I will address later on as well. This means that they generate only a quarter of the region's total production value. Concerning challenges SMEs face, I will focus on economic and business challenges for the time being, but we can talk about socioeconomic issues later on if time allows. Business continuity. COVID-19 lockdown measures led to an immediate loss of revenue, increasing the risk of bankruptcy due to little liquidity to withstand a negative shock for a long period. We know that this is one of the main issues SMEs face. Business closure leads to temporary or permanent job losses. And according to OECD estimates, globally 26% of SMEs closed between January and May this year. In Latin America and the Caribbean, this estimation suggests that between 30 and 45% of SMEs closed. These are really serious numbers. The contraction of the formal economy is likely to cause an expansion of the informal sector, thus increasing unfair competition for formal enterprises. And we know that in the informal sector creates poor quality jobs, which translates into low wages that may contribute to weaker demand, lower growth, and lower standards of living. Another challenge is related to the vicious circle whereby productivity, stagnation, and informality fuel each other's persistence. And I argue here that this has led to a low income trap at the micro and small enterprise level. Another important challenge is about building back productive capacity, which is essential to foster economic growth and job creation in the recovery phase. and restore a conducive business environment, key, of course, for sustainable enterprise development. I would like to focus as well on the risk of a structural and permanent damage to the economy if containment measures need to be reinstated, which could cause a social welfare loss. And by social welfare loss, I mean a decline in the quality of life for some or all citizens. This graph illustrates the case of a permanent social welfare loss. For example, the blue line shows the social welfare trajectory without pandemic, and the brownish line illustrates the change in level and trend of social welfare after the COVID shock. In the absence of effective measures to contain the spread of the virus and measures to support a sustained recovery, there is a real risk to never go back to pre-COVID living standards. However, if effective measures are implemented, social welfare could return to pre-COVID trajectory of socioeconomic development. Concerning opportunities, I would like to focus on building back an inclusive, sustainable, and resilient knowledge-based economy. This is an opportunity to promote the transition to a knowledge-based economy with a view to ending dependence on raw materials. This requires investment in research and development and in the design of an innovation ecosystem to increase productivity and foster productive development. To reconstruct the productive capacity, the promotion and support of entrepreneurship in the informal economy is essential. Let us remember, ladies and gentlemen, that startups do not flourish in a vacuum. They need markets, institutions, and networks to emerge and expand. This is also a great opportunity to devise an integral strategy to enhance systemic productivity to close gaps between micro and SMEs and large firms. The promotion to the formal economy will be another important opportunity by several measures that could be implemented, such as the simplification of registration, fair and simple taxation, fiscal incentives, and skills development. Access to finance, of course, is always an important issue for SMEs. Finally, I would close these initial remarks by including also social protection. It is very important to have measures to strengthen social protection and public health systems in the aftermath of this crisis. This is it for now, Matthias, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Jose Luis. That was very helpful, in particular also your hint to social protection, because indeed what we see is that the crisis due to the pandemic becomes a humanitarian catastrophe for many, many families who are suddenly out of money, who now relying on the support of their children working. And that is why in many ways we fear that child labor, for instance, will rise due to the corona environment, which is of course a very grave human rights violation. So thank you so much. We have spoken a lot about SMEs, and now it's important that we speak with an SME. So I'm very happy to have with us Santiago Uribe, who is the CEO of a SME in Colombia. He will explain a bit what they are doing actually, but we want to learn from him what are the challenges with regards to human rights, but also what are the opportunities, because as Dante already said, SMEs have a lot of opportunities actually, a lot of advantages in contrast to the big companies who might have bigger problems to roll out their human rights policy, who have bigger challenges what local communities want to them, which have bigger problems also to convince perhaps the stakeholders, the board, to finance some of their activities. So we want to focus on both the opportunities and the challenges. Before I give you the word, I just want to mention two things. First of all, please use the chat function. If you have any comments, any question, we will address you very shortly. So please make use of that. And you can speak in Spanish, no problem. And the second point is all the presentation, which you have seen so far from Dante, from Jose Luis, will be uploaded or already uploaded actually in the system, so you can download them. With that, directly over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Matthias, and to all the panelists, organizers, and everyone who is watching this this panel. To be honest, the first challenge for SMEs with human rights is that we don't normally talk about that. It's just that we are so focused on growing, developing our business, and that's something which is not on a everyday basis language. So in my case, the past few days, I've been learning a lot, and I've been doing that in this panel, and also with local business organization, because I think like once I knew about this panel, I went to them, and they, as the panel was mentioning, these are very good channels if we want to address this issue. Let me share for a second some presentation that I have, because it will help me talk about this issue. First of all, what is Azimut? Azimut Energía is a digital platform that connects customers with energy saving solution using data. We have been growing fast over the last 3 years. We have been growing nine times in revenue, headcount. We are around 60 people right now. And the thing that makes me very proud is that we are not only growing and generating employment, but we save energy to our customers, so they are more competitive, around $20 million in the last years. But also by doing this, we reduce the environmental impact of our customers by avoiding more than 35,000 CO2 emission, which is the equivalent of planting or seeding more than 507,000 trees. So this is something that I want to address in this conversation. And the way to do it is that for us, I believe it is easier to talk about SDGs than what it is to talk about human rights. So what we have seen in our company is that we directly have an impact on more than 6 of these goals. Here you can see some of them, the 7, the 8, 9, 11, 12, 13. And as I was studying for this panel, I found some interesting information about how SDGs goals relate to human rights. Sorry if it is in Spanish, is the reference that I received, but you see how there's a direct impact. So my first idea will be maybe to make it more accessible for business people, which is my perspective right now. Sometimes will be easier to talk about SDGs and knowing that there is a direct impact. That will be like my first comment. The second part will be how to have, so if we know that there is a direct relation with SDGs and human rights, how to have this impact. So my business perspective, and I believe it is not only for SMEs, but for all companies, will be to align our business models to SDGs. My idea here and the way we have addressed our business is that the better you do with your business, the more you will contribute to SDGs and to human rights. So that's a win-win. I believe that that's the best business of all. And as a policy reference, I will say that, and I feel very in line with the previous panelists, because we have to be very careful with adding new regulations in our countries, because the biggest challenge will be the informality. So in Colombia, around 50% of jobs are informal, and it's very hard to control informality and how they are addressing human rights and SDGs. So there's normally the tendency to say, let's address this by having new laws. But I believe that we have strong laws, and if we are formals, we can control those, but not adding because it will be counterproductive. The other part on this policy effort will be to focus on the correct growth environment, because once you start growing as a company and as a country, you have more resources, so you can have a better impact on human rights, on SDGs. And in order to do this, in our perspective, taxes, regulation, and institution should be the focus, especially institutions. I truly believe that one of the problems in Latin America is not that we are so different from the rest of the world in general, is that we are in particular very different with institutions. We don't have strong institutions that will help us have the foundations to have a better growth. So that as a general main takeaway. And as an example, as I was mentioning, having the correct environment will help you also address your business business model to grow. And if you align this with the SDGs, you will have a direct impact with human rights. Let me put this in a more direct way, or as an example, what we do in Azimut. For the last year in Colombia, we have been having a very good environmental, economic environment. So we were able to develop our business, being profitable, generating jobs, but also being sustainable. So when we align our business model to the SDGs, so we know it will be a win-win, and then this will have a direct impact on human rights. I don't want to be long in my presentation. If any question, I will be more than welcome to address them.
Thank you so much, Santiago. And I think you made a very important point about the connection of the human rights agenda and the SDG agenda. And I think we will do a bit of a deep dive into these questions once we are finished with the first round of panelists. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much.
It is not only about business speaking about themselves. We really need the outside perspective. There's no point that we from the business side are all looking at our own challenges and our own opportunities. We need to know from stakeholders what are the challenges, what their perspective is, and what we can do better. So I'm very proud and very happy to have with us Mr. Julio Roberto Gomez, the president of the Alternativa Democrática Sindicat, who will speak about the trade union perspective on SMEs and human rights, and he will speak in Spanish. So over to you, Julio.
Muy buenos días. Muchísimas gracias por la invitación para participar de este panel. En efecto, represento a Alternativa Democrática Sindical de las Américas en mi carácter de presidente e igualmente como presidente de la Confederación General del Trabajo CGT en Colombia. Alternativa Democrática Sindical de las Américas, sindicalismo de valores y de principios, es una nueva organización internacional fundada hace 3 años y medio dentro del marco de la pluralidad sindical, dentro del marco de la libertad sindical, para proteger los derechos de los trabajadores en nuestra región. Somos una voz distinta, en efecto, en la región de las Américas. Hoy, nuestra fundamentación del desarrollo de un trabajo con base en lo que el deber ser del diálogo social, del tripartismo, de los acuerdos sociales, del desarrollo de una política que apunte a resolver de una manera civilizada los problemas que se nos presenten. Para nadie es un secreto la situación difícil de derechos humanos en varios países de la región latinoamericana caribeña, por ejemplo. En países donde el nuestro no está exento, pero en donde también hay países donde tenemos dictaduras de 60 años, como el caso de Cuba, en donde tenemos sistemas dictatoriales como el que asistimos y sufrimos en la hermana República de Venezuela, o situaciones que no han sido tan fáciles en otros países de la región como Nicaragua. Hablar con claridad de estos temas genera dificultades. Y por ello nosotros hoy queremos decirles a ustedes que compartimos el escenario de una defensa, como corresponde, de los derechos humanos de los trabajadores y en general de las poblaciones en nuestra región y en el mundo, y a la vez la defensa de la libertad de empresa, la defensa de un sistema que permita generar riqueza, que permita generar desarrollo en nuestra región y en el mundo entero. Por ello, para nosotros, segmentos tan importantes como la pequeña, la mediana empresa, tienen una importancia fundamental, pero también la gran empresa. Aquí no es simplemente decir, vea, solamente nos interesa esta variable, nos interesa todo en un marco profundo del respeto a los derechos humanos en donde está la libertad sindical, la libertad para que la gente se pueda asociar sin ninguna clase de restricciones y dándosele todas las garantías que se requieren para poderse desarrollar física y mentalmente en una sociedad en donde hay un déficit de derechos humanos, hay un déficit de justicia social, en donde cada vez debemos hablar con mucha franqueza de la necesidad de una mejor distribución del ingreso nacional. Aquí en la región de las Américas, nosotros tenemos, si se quiere, una región inmensamente rica, pero también inmensamente desigual. Y trabajadores y empresarios tenemos que trabajar al lado de gobiernos democráticos para ver cómo superamos esa situación de negación de los derechos de la población que quedan ahora más en evidencia a la luz de una pandemia que uno no sabe cuándo va a terminar, pero tenemos el acompañamiento de otras pandemias como la pandemia del desempleo, la pandemia de la informalidad, la pandemia de la corrupción, que creo que en esto estamos plenamente identificados particularmente con el sector empresarial, con el sector empleador, con la Organización Internacional de Empleadores, para ver cómo combatimos la corrupción, que lo único que es capaz de generar es pobreza en nuestros países. De tal manera que nosotros, como Alternativa Democrática Sindical de las Américas, con una presencia en varios países, hasta ahora en 15 países de la región, en cabeza de nuestros afiliados en México, la CTM, la CROC, e igualmente Fuerza Sindical en Brasil, la CGT en Colombia, organizaciones también en el Cono Sur, en el área andina, en Centroamérica, en el Caribe. Nosotros creemos que tenemos futuro, pero además tenemos el legítimo derecho de ser respetados como esa nueva organización internacional que estamos también propiciando un espacio en la Organización Internacional del Trabajo, porque también allí hay organizaciones muy pequeñas, sin embargo, que son reconocidas. Nosotros, sin embargo, a pesar de tener más de 20 millones de afiliados en la región, esta es la hora en que se nos ha negado la participación como organización consultiva en el sistema de naciones a instancias de la Organización Internacional del Trabajo. Por ello, para nosotros reviste una importancia fundamental que ustedes nos hayan dado la oportunidad de expresarnos en este importantísimo foro, que ustedes hayan tenido la oportunidad de escucharnos. Lamento no hablar inglés, lamento solamente hablar español, pero esperamos nosotros tener el mejor relacionamiento, así como lo tenemos con otros gremios de la producción, tenerlo en estos momentos con todos ustedes. Muchísimas gracias y disculpen si me extendí un par de minutos más. Muy amables.
Thank you so much, Julio Roberto. That was really important. And I think you rightly stressed the need to address inequalities, which of course means, first of all, to have access to fair chances in life, access to education, access in the labor market, having a chance to make a career. So in order to address inequalities, we need to have a bigger focus on these chances in life. Now, the big topic we heard was the linking between the SDG agenda and the human rights agenda, which is, it seems crucial, particularly to promote human rights among SMEs, because it seems what we heard that they are more aligned with the SDGs, they've heard more often about it, they can better refer to that than the theoretical concept of human rights. Dante, what is the thinking from the UN Working Group on that, and also your experience in the region? Can you elaborate a bit on that? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Matthias, and everyone else. First to say that my grandfather from father's side was a small business owner, and my mother is an entrepreneur with 160 employees after a life of long work in her own business, and now really struggling with COVID-19, losing a lot of money to keep salaries and workers in their workplace. So I have familiarity also inside my own blood, let's say, with the struggle and the reality of SMEs running business and trying to act correctly, act ethically, and at the same time, the enabling environment or the lack of enabling environment, the cost that they have or they need to pay. I want to just address the connection with the SDGs, and that is a very interesting point that was raised before. The SDGs have 3 chapters. The introduction that says, for example, human rights is cross-cutting issue. Then the goals and targets, 93% of which are linked to human rights, 93%. But then there's a 3rd chapter that is called means for implementation that very often is not read, but it explicitly says the contribution of business to the Sustainable Development Agenda should be based on international norms of behavior, such as the ILO Tripartite Declaration and the Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. So it's not a pick and choose approach, it's to basically wear those lens, understand your impacts and deal with them responsibly. A very good thing in our position regarding the SDGs is the following, and we have stated this many times in public, including this Forum on Business and Human Rights in the opening remarks by our current chair, Anita. Goal 17 calls upon a new alliance or revitalized alliance for sustainable development, in which all members of society needs to be part of the solution of societal challenges. Therefore, it's a call to work together, and business is not stigmatized as only part of the problem, having negative impacts. Of course, business have negative impacts. All human nature has impacts, or activities have impacts. But it's also a call to be part of the solution. And that is very positive narrative and language that brings into what is being called by General Secretary Guterres inclusive multilateralism, in which the solutions of societal problems work better and have a better chance to achieve the goals we need when we actually collaborate based on good faith, on honest engagement, on social dialogue ultimately. So that's one thing. The second thing, after goal 17, for us is goal 16, which is about institutions. Because if we don't have solid foundations at the global level or the national level, on top of what are we going to build the solutions, and solutions that need to be implemented incrementally over decades? If we think about the SDGs, the goals are for 2030, but climate change that hits, for example, the Caribbean so badly, the goals are for 2050. And the European Commission is actually planning the strategy regarding sustainable development in function of the whole century. Therefore, I just want to stress that point. And then a comment for Santiago Uribe from Colombia. You put it well in terms of the SDGs to be lens, and we welcome that. That's fine. But the business contribution to the SDGs first is doing no harm. Minimizing or mitigating negative impacts is the greatest contribution business can make, and SMEs can, of course, are part of that. And actually, the case that you just signaled, reducing negative environmental impacts and saving energy, is a very, very clear example of, by doing no harm or minimizing negative impacts, is the greatest contribution. And then maximizing positive impact, of course, is always and should always be welcome. But that is the starting point. And then the starting point has to be, or should be, linked to due diligence, which is an exercise to understand negative impacts. And the European Commission have issued a very fine, easy to understand, step-by-step due diligence process for human rights thinking and SMEs. So simple questions to be addressed. But wearing the shoes of SMEs, being empathic with SMEs, is key here for public policy setting and better policies. But and there the role of industry associations to facilitate the participation of SMEs and to digest and help digest what is expected for all business to do, but wearing the lens of an SME that you well said is doing many things and doesn't think in terms of human rights necessarily. The final point, what we find in practice is that SMEs respond very fast to the market. to market incentives, to market requirements, to expectations of the society, because the decision-making process is very close to the decision makers and to the decisions itself. Therefore, sometimes large companies that might seem to be more sophisticated actually have a very tough time to change. SMEs, because the owners are running the company, are very close to reality. When they see an opportunity or they sense a change in the environment, they go for it and they take it and they change fast and adapt very fast. So SMEs in general are way more resilient than large companies. And of course, many are very low in competitiveness, therefore they might even disappear. But the ones that actually are adaptive to the changing context are way more competitive if you think about it than large traditional companies that have, it's like an elephant trying to change, very difficult. But when you're small and you have the enabling environment, the right environment of incentives and rewarding mechanism, you actually go for it and you change fast and adapt fast. Therefore, I'm very positive in terms of the expectations of what we can do by including the SME dimension and the overall picture of business and human rights. Thank you.
Dante, if you allow me.
So, yeah, one second, exactly, Santiago, you can respond to that, but I just want to give to Dante a homework. During your speech, Santiago, Dante can put up in the chat, please, the link to this guide of the Human Commission you have referred to, so everyone actually can benefit to it. I'm not sure whether it is also in Spanish. That would be, of course, great. But anyway, if you could do that, that would be very helpful. And Santiago, when you respond to Dante, if you also could be honestly tell us, have you ever heard about human rights due diligence? Exactly, that's what I thought. So I will bring in Pablo in a minute to speak a bit about the need of awareness raising. Santiago, to respond.
Just a small remark, please. Thank you very much, Dante, for your comments. One idea is that you mentioned how flexible and fast SMEs adapt, and the main driver for this will be market. So if it is like if you can have a connect link between human rights and market, most SMEs will love to do all of this extra work, because it will not be an extra work which is on a vacuum space. It will help you to drive more sales or be more competitive, or so on. So maybe a seal, like approval seal, like you are approved by United Nations, whatever, that you have passed all of these questions and you are good to go on human rights. And if the market will reward that, I will bet you that most SMEs will love to do all of this thing and learn more. I think the incentive, if you take it to the market, sales, competitiveness, everybody will be talking about that.
In 2018, at the beginning of the annual Forum on Business and Human Rights in Geneva, the High Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, said something that is quite important and remarkable, have never been said before, is that doing the right thing, respecting human rights, is the smart thing to do. Making a connection between let's say, the obligation and the moral obligation to respect human rights with a business case. And she made that remark. And the business case is actually quite clear. If you're an SME today and you're connected to a larger company, it's almost impossible not to imagine the larger company asking you for better traceability on, let's say, health and safety or environmental performance, which actually is linked clearly to human rights, the health and safety of your own workers. If you're connected in a global market, it's almost impossible that those clients of yours or investors, directly or indirectly, are not asking questions. And how safe is the supply chain? How transparent it is? What's the governance structure? Because they don't want to be caught in a scandal related to modern slavery, for example.
Exactly.
And the governments have a very, very big role to play in public procurement, for example, and the procurement of state-owned enterprises. I had a dialogue with the president of Ecopetrol in Colombia, the largest company in the country, state-owned, less than 2 weeks ago. And this was part of the conversation. The huge leverage that large companies have to push in doing the right thing, and also connecting with commitments and obligations that have subscribed our own governments, like the Colombian one. So you're very right in this connection. Your intuition is very clear, and I will just say that this intuition that you're describing is something that has been normalized by the High Commissioner herself, allowing us to have a very open conversation about market incentives connected to respect to human rights.
Thank you, Dante. I want to also bring in now others. Your homework is really to look at the link for the guidance, because we have there also questions in the chat. What is good guidance for SMEs? So that is now your homework. Please put it into the chat, the guidance you would recommend. Also, I will put afterwards the website of the IEE, because we have a lot of documents for you on our website. Now, Pablo, I like to come to you, because Santiago was very clear and very open, right? He started, because of this panel, to think about human rights. So there's a huge, huge opportunity for raising awareness, right? Raising awareness about human rights in generally, but also about the fine finesse, so to say, about human rights due diligence. What does it actually mean, as Dante has just elaborated on? So if you could tell us what your organization, the Employers and Business Organization in Argentina, is doing to bring this into the SMEs community, that would be great. 2 minutes, because I also would like to come to the other panelists.
Sure. Well, 2 minutes, 2 ideas. The first one I said a little bit in my introduction. It was that this toolkit we have managed to a toolkit for it was for decent work, but it has a comprehensive approach in terms of business and human rights. So this auto-diagnosis toolkit made a good something that every SMEs could manage to do. Including that, we have also been doing with specific sectors and regions a program of trainers. In this aspect, so it was that something good. And currently, we are doing with the help of ILO and ACTEMP not the guidance, but a position document that we have to check how to be done in terms of business and human rights, which I think it's something that is good, and that business organizations should be doing, and for example, taking into account what the CPC has been doing in Chile or different other organizations in the region. Well, we are doing this not only between UIA, but also to more to other sectors such as rural or construction or banks, for example.
Thank you so much, Pablo.
So this is the 2 things that we are mainly doing, and we hope that.
Thank you so much, Pablo. And you referred to the tool which you have. So also your task is now to quickly make the link to this tool into the chat, so everyone can benefit from it. So not only the SMEs in Argentina, but also, of course, in the whole region. That would be great. So please do so quickly so everyone can see the toolkit. Stephanie, I would like to come to you. Everyone referred to the big informal sector in the region, right? As a huge, huge challenge. Promoting human rights in the informal sector is hardly possible. Your question: do you have any ideas what from the business side can be done, from the employer side can be done in order to promote this agenda? Because we always talk about the informality, but do you have any concrete proposal actually what can be done in order to address the problem? Over to you.
I would say someone mentioned fair and simple taxation. And what we find is that the taxation structures that we sometimes have, and even the cost of doing business generally from a statutory perspective, sometimes is prohibitive. And employers at the SME level are not always able to comply. And when we talk about the SDGs and human rights, we need to make some provision, perhaps some sort of incentive, so that they are able to do that comfortably. And the other thing that we find with the SDGs and when it comes to human rights would be for SMEs, the level at which the communication and the understanding, we talked about the guiding principles. In our part of the world, and particularly in Trinidad, I do not know that we have really disseminated that in simple language, in practical ways. And to me, there's a lot of education needed for people to see the long-term benefit. And really, we're talking about sustainability. And the average thought is that this is going to cost me time and money. And we do not really see, as SMEs, what is that long-term benefit for our very businesses. We talked about the, Pablo, I think, talked about his mother, who was a very promising and successful business person. And now she's having difficulty. And therefore, that type of understanding and language, I believe, we need to promote in a concrete way, as you were saying, have it well documented, education, plans and engagements, and so to really realize and see to see the results. We only have 10 more years for that to happen.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Luis, I would like to come to you. We learned from Pablo that ACTEM is supporting Employers Federation in the region to promote toolkits on human rights. Can you give us a update, actually, what are the different initiatives on human rights ACTEM is doing in the region? 2 minutes for you. Jose Luis? He left. The question was not the right one. I'm sorry. Let me directly come to you, Mr. Gomez, and I hope you understand me. Otherwise, Dante can translate. You know, we speak very much about raising awareness about human rights among SMEs. Is there any agenda from the trade unions to raise awareness among their own, about their own members, about the workforce, about human rights guiding principles, about due diligence? Is there any agenda you doing with regards to your members, your union members? Perhaps, Dante, you can translate into Spanish.
Yes, I can. La pregunta que hacía Matías a Julio respecto de la agenda sindical en Latinoamérica y el Caribe respecto de la pequeña y mediana empresa y el respeto de los derechos humanos. Eso es básicamente el punto de Matías, si lo tienen en la agenda y si lo están empujando.
Sí, en efecto está en la agenda del movimiento sindical en la región de las Américas, en América Latina, Caribe, el tema de la mediana empresa, la pequeña empresa, que genera desarrollo, que genera también muchísimas fuentes de empleo, y trabajando colateralmente en todo el tema que tiene que ver con los derechos humanos. Hoy, más que nunca, el déficit que podamos tener en materia de derechos humanos se supera con trabajo decente, se supera con un compromiso cada vez mayor del movimiento sindical para con la defensa del empleo. Es que nosotros no podemos permitir que se deterioren las empresas, que desaparezcan, que cada vez tengan mayores dificultades. Hay una equivocación en algunos sectores que creen que para nosotros el empleo no es lo fundamental. El doctor Alberto Echavarría, que es el vocero del sector empresarial de Colombia, en el Consejo de Administración de la OIT, sabe de nuestro compromiso para con el empleo. Nosotros defendemos la libertad de empresa. Si no hay libertad de empresa, tanto a nivel de gran empresa, pero también a nivel de pequeña y mediana empresa, difícilmente se pueden desarrollar los países, difícilmente se puede desarrollar la democracia. Por eso, dentro de nuestra agenda están los objetivos, los 17 objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Dentro de ellos, naturalmente, el trabajo decente, pero también todo lo que tiene que ver con el desarrollo en general de la comunidad está en nuestra agenda. En ADS, por lo menos, esto es parte de nuestra política y estrategia de fondo, la defensa de la empresa, de la pequeña y la mediana, pero también de la gran empresa, lo decimos con toda franqueza, a los efectos de encontrar salidas. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much. We have 1 minute left, so just 1 minute to thank all of you to take your time to join this panel. there's much more to do with regard to SMEs and human rights. We all agree on that. And I also take the point that we have to take this as employers organization to increase our efforts to bring the agenda to the SMEs. I also would like to thank my colleagues actually who have helped me here, Luis Rodriguez, who was looking at the chat, Monique Pierre, who was organizing this, and Maria Paz, who was in contact with many of you. So thank you so much. We will continue the conversation and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Gracias.
Thank you.